I think healthcare loves to do pilots. They like to test, but you don't see too many things really get to scale. Can you talk about why that is?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that healthcare loves pilots. A decade ago, I wrote an article for KQED that was death by pilot because I just saw so many healthcare startups do pilots that would go nowhere and waste the time. And I've talked about that quite a bit. I wouldn't say healthcare hates scale. It's definitely challenging to scale, but it took scale for the incumbents to get as much power as they have today, especially health plans, pharmacy benefits managers, but certainly from the provider side, it's very fragmented. It's very regional. So there's scale in some places that has been a disadvantage to patients, and then not scale in other places where maybe we would have a better experience if there was some economies of scale there. I think the problem is that we often confuse proof of concept with proof of impact. And then we never do the hard work of operationalizing the scale. And a lot of people say, we have an implementation problem, not an innovation problem in healthcare. That the problem isn't that we don't have tools that are helpful, but that we don't have a way to implement them and we don't have teams to implement them broadly. And that kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier with the cultural friction that you see in a lot of these old school healthcare systems. But evidence certainly matters in healthcare more than industries. As you said, proof, evidence is the term that we use. And it's because human lives are at stake and the downside risk is much bigger. And healthcare, the first most famous principle in the Hippocratic Oath is first do no harm. So there's reasonable caution when trying new things, but it's led to a culture of not trying anything and just accepting the status quo when we really need to change things. The path we're on is not sustainable.
Yeah. I want to talk about founders. You meet a lot of founders all the time, every day. You've been an investor. Talk to me about sort of myths that founders tell you that maybe they still pitch, even though you know it's not true. Are there things that just keep coming up from founding teams that you just wish we could myth
within
bust?
Healthcare specifically?
Yeah, within healthcare. Yeah.
Sometimes we think that there are easy tech solutions when the problem is really regulatory or behavior change. And those are things that I wish founders could have a bigger impact on, but there's a ton of regulatory capture within healthcare. We can talk about that later. But I think one example is I've seen over the years so many companies trying to tackle medication adherence and just getting people to take their meds because a lot of prescriptions go unfilled or people aren't taking them appropriately. And it is really a huge problem. I've seen a lot of physical solutions, people building futuristic pill boxes to apps that incentivize you to take it. But the number one reason people don't fill their medication is because the high cost of drugs. And where I want to get excited about some of these solutions, and some of them are really cool. I also, with my public health hat on, look at this of if we really want to tackle medication adherence, we need to tackle the high cost of medications. And so I think that founders, I wouldn't say something they should unlearn, but something I wish more of them would bring is recognizing that your solution can help solve one of the many problems within healthcare, but also we need your voice and your advocacy because there are some pieces of it that are going to be beyond your control and your ability to solve. But if you become an expert in the problem, then you are well positioned to advocate on behalf of that problem and solve it from a government level, from an incumbent level, just bringing attention to it. And I think Mark Cuban is a great example, and he's doing this right now, bringing incredible attention to the problem that they're trying to solve at his new company, Cost Plus Drugs. And he's being very outspoken about some of the intermediaries within healthcare that he thinks are malicious and then lobbying on behalf of it. And he's gone to Congress and spoken there, and he's, being an advocate for the problem, which I think more founders need to do.
I think that's such an interesting point because it does seem like it's an industry as a founder where you can't just focus on your one product or your one solution. You've really got to understand the full system and where it fits in. And then, like you said, be an advocate for the whole system of change and for others as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And ultimately, if your goal is to get people to take their medication, however that happens, the the way to get there shouldn't matter. It's like, if you are dedicated to this problem, then let's look holistically at why does this problem exist and where else do we need change?
Yeah. How do you distinguish between tech that looks really impressive and tech that actually has an impact and changes outcomes?
I actually love tech that looks impressive because healthcare deserves better, but obviously it only matters if it's moving the needle in healthcare. Either what we call like it started off as the iron triangle, but now there are four things, but improving outcomes, increasing access, lowering costs, or improving the healthcare experience. And the only thing that you can do is look at the evidence. The challenge at the early stage is that the evidence is necessarily thin. So what I look for isn't perfect data. I look for directional proof, general data of studies of similar interventions, early signals consistent with real world use, not just ideal conditions, and then obviously the people involved. So much of it is the people involved. And this is true for most industries. Are they precise about what they know, what they don't know, and then bringing in kind of the right team and partners to the table?
It's interesting, though, too, with venture, right? In venture investing, there is this timeline for venture. And if you need the proof and you need the outcomes and you need the research, that can take more time. Is that at odds with venture at all? Or how do you reconcile that?
100%. I think biotech investing has always been like that, where it takes a lot of time to get through clinical trials. So there are some parts of venture, and biotech has always been venture backed. There are some places within venture investing that understand these long, risky timelines. But as with tech investors, they don't necessarily have that same level of patience, because what they're comparing their investments to are these very rapidly growing, easy to pivot products that can grow very quickly without data. You don't need the data. Is how many users are logging in, how many people are paying for it. The sort of KPIs are quite simple, whereas in healthcare, it takes the KPIs are going to be a lot longer to generate, because sometimes healthcare outcomes take more than a day to see, or the savings is in the long run. So it's difficult. But then I do think that there are a lot of tech investors who genuinely want to do healthcare and balance their portfolio with healthcare investments, because they recognize the TAM is really high. They recognize the impact is potentially huge. And so there's mission orientation to investing in healthcare, just having to manage expectations of growth. And it's really important not to push the founders in a way that causes them to cut corners. And we've seen this, right? Biome was famously, I talk about the Biome case in my book on how that happened. An otherwise very impressive team that ended up cutting a lot of corners, getting in big trouble with the FBI, and are now fugitives on the run. And a lot of that comes down to the pressure from investors to grow at all costs. So we have some cautionary tales, and hopefully that has spooked folks enough that the investors recognize that we can't take that same grow at all cost mentality to healthcare.